Hello, I'm the Nordic Investor, welcome back. I'm Swedish and I moved to Brazil over 5 years ago. And in this channel I talk about my life here in Brazil and also how I've stopped working and live off my investments. And in today's video I want to talk about how safe Brazil is to live. Now I've had a lot of questions and comments from people asking me, is it really safe to live here in Brazil? So I thought I'll do a video today, kind of sharing my experiences and my opinion about crime here in Brazil. So let's begin. Okay, so to begin with, I'm just going to talk a bit about crime levels in the whole of Brazil, and then later I'll talk about specific areas and cities. So this is a map of the world showing you crime rates for all the countries in the world. And you can see here that Brazil has a crime index rate of 67. Crime index rate, that kind of takes into account all types of crimes from petty crime to more serious crimes. And so Brazil, you can see here, is pretty dark, around 60, 70. And there aren't that many countries that have higher crime index rates. You've got Venezuela, South Africa, Afghanistan, and one or two other countries. So this shows that Brazil has high crime levels. You can see that America has lower at 50. In Europe again is a range between kind of 30 to 50. And if you look at just homicide rates, so the more serious crimes, you can see again Brazil is up there near the top, again with homicide rate of 20. So that is 20 homicides per 100,000 population. And you can see that America is 2.5, and in Europe, kind of England, France as well, 2.5, and other countries even lower at 1. And they say this is homicide rate for 2023, but I think some of the data for some of the countries here is a bit older. And actually for Brazil, kind of homicide rates have been decreasing. So we've got an article here, so this talks about homicide rates in Brazil over the years, and you can kind of see here 2007, it was 44,000 homicides in that year, and then it just started going up, increasing to like 2017 it was up to 59,000 homicides in that year, and then it started to decline, and last year 2022 it was 40,000 homicides. So the rate has been decreasing, but it's still pretty high in comparison to other countries. Now Brazil is a massive country with over 200 million people, so you can't really just say that a whole country is safe or not safe. You kind of have to look at particular areas and specific cities. But before that, I just want to talk about some of the common crimes that happen in Brazil. Obviously you have lots of petty crimes, there's lots of pickpocketing, especially in tourist areas, and also people just snatching your mobile when you're walking along the street. But then there are also lots of serious crimes as well. And I kind of think there are kind of three types of serious crime that happens a lot in Brazil. So the first one is carjacking, the second one is mugging, and the third one is getting entry into your house and stealing your possessions. But all three of these with the use of a weapon, so a knife or a gun or something like that. Just to explain a bit more about each one of these, so the first one, carjacking. Now this happens a lot, especially when people are parking their cars and there's someone hanging about nearby, and so you exit your vehicle and then someone approaches you with a weapon and asks for your wallet and mobile and your car keys, and they steal your car. And then that also happens a lot when you're returning to your parked car. So again, you're unlocking your car to go into your car to drive off, and then someone approaches you with a weapon again, stealing your car and your valuables. And finally, another way they can steal your car and your valuables is when you're driving near a traffic light, or you're just stuck in traffic and someone walks up to your car, kind of bangs on your windscreen and asks for your valuable and for you to get out the car, and they drive off with your car. Or sometimes they approach you with a motorbike, two people on a motorbike, and the passenger on the motorbike again kind of just knocks on your windscreen, shows the weapon and just asks for your valuables, and then sometimes also steals your car. Now in most cases, that's it. People kind of just give their valuables and let the criminal drive off with their car, but obviously there's a risk that the person confronts the criminal and they get injured or even worse. And so this can be a very serious crime, and it does happen a lot in Brazil. But there are obviously ways of avoiding this. So the first and most easiest way is you park in private car parks with security. So if you're going to a shopping mall, you park in the car park of the shopping mall. And if you're going somewhere else which doesn't have a private car park, then usually there is another car park with security pretty close by, and you use those. So you really try to avoid parking on the street. Obviously this costs more money, but I do this all the time when I have to go to one of the big cities, just to reduce down the risk of this happening to me. Obviously there are other precautions you can also take, and some people, they bulletproof their cars, so they have bulletproof glass on the windows, and the doors are reinforced, and this is very expensive, and it makes the car really heavy as well, and the performance deteriorates, and it's complicated. But a lot of people do that, especially in Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo, the big cities. Okay, so that's carjacking. The second one is mugging. So people just walking on the street, and then someone approaches you, shows a weapon, and asks for your valuables. And again, this is pretty common, and again, if you don't resist and just give it, then that's that. But some people try and fight back, and that's when it goes wrong. In terms of precautions, you don't walk around showing your mobile or your wallet. You kind of just keep it in your pockets, and you don't try and draw attention to yourself. And the third one is breaking into your house, but this is breaking into your house when you're at home. So this happens, again, similar to the cars, it happens a lot when you're leaving or entering your house. So basically someone's hanging around close to the entrance to your house, and so when you leave, they quickly enter into your house with you, or when you're coming back to your house, again, they kind of force themselves into your house when you've opened the door. In terms of precautions the Brazilians take, so with apartment buildings, usually they have fences around the apartment buildings, sometimes even electric fences, and then the bigger ones have security guards, and they usually stay near the entrance, and so if you want to enter and leave the apartment building, the security guard kind of opens and closes for you. Now if you live in a house, most houses usually have fences, maybe even electric fences, cameras. People have burglar alarms, panic alarms, and they pay a security company who comes over when that alarm goes off. In some houses they even have security guards on the street, so kind of the whole street pays for a security guard to stay there, sometimes just during the night, others 24 hours a day, and the security guard kind of just goes up and down the street checking that everything is okay. Okay, so those are kind of three very common crimes that happen in Brazil, and I know people who have all experienced this crime. Now these crimes are very common in certain parts of Brazil, and in other areas they're very rare. In general, these crimes happen a lot more in the bigger cities, and in the smaller towns, in the countryside, it's a lot safer. Okay, so now let's have a look at specific areas in Brazil to see which areas are safer and which are less safe. Okay, so this is Numbeo, so this is quite a good website. It kind of shows you crime around the world and a specific city. So if we just look at Brazil here, for example, you can see it doesn't have crime for all the cities here, but kind of gives you a good indication. So you can see here in the northeast of Brazil, you've got big cities which are Fortaleza, Recife, and Salvador. Now these are nice cities with really nice beaches. The climate is very hot and nice as well, but unfortunately crime levels are pretty high. So you can see it's red here, so red indicates high levels of crime, and one of the reasons for that is kind of the north and the northeast area of Brazil is poorer than kind of the southeast and the south. So if we just click on Fortaleza, for example, you can show here that the level of crime is very high at 89. Now this is talking about all types of crime, from petty crime to serious crime. Now saying that doesn't mean that the whole of Fortaleza is unsafe. There are some very nice areas in Fortaleza. They've got very nice hotels and resorts as well. But you just have to be careful, and you can't do what we Europeans do, is where you kind of arrive at a city and you just start walking around the city and exploring the city. No, you can't do that, so you have to be aware of which parts are safe and which are less safe, and you kind of have to take some precautions. So when I visited Fortaleza, I stayed near Praia de Meireles and also Praia de Iracema. These are nice areas and I felt safe there. And I did some excursions as well. These were all organized excursions. I didn't just go by myself. And so I had a really great time in Fortaleza. So don't get the wrong impression that you should avoid Fortaleza, but you do need to just be careful. So the same applies for Recife and Salvador. And then going further south, you've got Rio de Janeiro. So that's another city with high crime rates. So this is Brazil's second biggest city. It's got nearly 7 million inhabitants. And again, crime levels are pretty high. And one of the reasons for that is kind of the favela shanty towns, so kind of the poor areas, are spread out throughout the city. So the crime from those favelas kind of spread to the whole city. Now Rio de Janeiro is a beautiful city, really nice landscape, nice beaches, a lot of history to the city as well. You've got safe areas in Rio, so kind of the Zona Sul, the south zone, is pretty safe. So you kind of got Leblon, Ipanema, and other areas. But even there you kind of have to take precautions, don't kind of walk around showing your mobile, and be careful walking at night time as well. And when I visited Rio, I went there with a friend who was very familiar with Rio de Janeiro, and so he knew exactly where to go and kind of went sightseeing with me. So that's always a good way of doing it. So you go with a local, but if you don't know anyone, then you kind of go with organized excursions to all the tourist sites and everything. And then you go to the biggest city in Brazil, and that's Sao Paulo. In the whole metropolitan area of Sao Paulo, you've got over 20 million people living there, so it's massive. Now here crime levels are lower than Rio de Janeiro, so let's just have a look. So you see here level of crime at 80. Now Sao Paulo is kind of the economic capital of Brazil, so all the kind of the big companies that are their headquarters in Sao Paulo. So kind of the local government does have a fair bit of money to kind of spend on security. And when I visited Sao Paulo, I felt very safe there, and I actually did a fair bit of walking around the city. Now that was mainly in the west, where you kind of got Vila Madalena, Pinheiros, and other areas. But saying that, obviously there are lots of areas that you do want to avoid, lots of favelas, shanty towns, and as you can see here, crime levels are still pretty high. My kind of experience was that Sao Paulo definitely felt a lot safer than Rio de Janeiro. But saying that, I would never live in Sao Paulo. I prefer my little town in the countryside here in the south, where crime levels are close to non-existent. But I'll talk more about that later. And then going further south, you've got Curitiba, which is the capital of Paraná, and Florianopolis, which is the capital of Santa Catarina. Now these are two very nice cities. Here they've got lower crime, especially Florianopolis. You can see that's the only one here which is yellow, indicating fairly low levels of crime. The Florianopolis is quite a small city, about 500,000 people, and if I had to choose one city to live in Brazil, it would be Florianopolis. So it's smaller, low levels of crime, fairly organized, and it's got really nice beaches. So just clicking on Florianopolis, for example, so here you can see level of crime 55 moderate. So it's a lot lower than, the cities in the north and Sao Paulo and Rio. And then further in the south you got Porto Alegre, but this you can see is red, so this is higher crime levels. Now Porto Alegre, in the past, having spoken to a lot of people, they said it was very safe and well organized, and then recently it's deteriorated a lot, and now crime levels are pretty high in Porto Alegre. Okay, so that's kind of the big cities in Brazil. Obviously there are others which I haven't touched on, but you can kind of see there that crime levels are pretty high in a lot of the cities, and really the only one that stands out is Florianopolis, which has a lot lower crime levels. But saying that, I would never live in any of these big cities, and they're great to visit, but for me that's all I would do. And in my view, if you do really want to feel safe here in Brazil, so not worry about this carjacking and mugging and everything, then you need to live in one of the smaller towns in the countryside in Brazil, and that's what I do. So I live in a small town here in the south of Brazil, and It's got about 20,000 inhabitants. And here in my town, there are no carjackings, there are no muggings, there are no forced entry into houses. The only crimes you have here is now and again some car windows are broken and people steal something inside a car. And then sometimes there's some burglaries as well, but when people aren't at home. And that's it. So I kind of feel that the crime levels here in my town are similar to kind of the crime levels I had in my town in Sweden and in other areas of Europe that I've lived in. And so in my town I feel safe walking around during the day, even the night. My house just has a small fence around it. There's no big fence, no electric fencing around. And so I wanted to do this video to kind of show you that yes, there are some very unsafe areas in Brazil, but don't just look at crime levels in the whole of Brazil and think that applies to the whole country. No. So there are areas that are very safe and you don't need to worry about crime. And just to point out a few areas which I think are very safe. So we've just looked at the south of Brazil, which I am more familiar with. So we've go to Rio Grande do Sul, which is the most southern state in Brazil. So remember I talked about Porto Alegre and how crime levels are very high here in Porto Alegre. But actually if you just travel out of Porto Alegre and go to this area here, so you've got Gramado, Canela here, and even kind of San Francisco de Paulo. This area is very safe, very low levels of crime. And I'll do a specific video about these towns to show you that if you were to live in these towns here, you'd feel very safe and the chances of you having any problems are very low. And then if we go to Santa Catarina, which is a bit further north, we got Florianopolis, which is a city I talked about, which has a lot lower crime levels compared to the other big cities. If you were to live a bit further away from Florianopolis into the countryside more, you've got Brusque and smaller towns around there, as well Lages, just further south here as well. And these towns here have got very low levels of crime. Again, if you were to live here, you'd feel very safe and the chances of you having any issues are very low. Okay, so I hope this video was helpful, just to clarify a bit about what crime is like in Brazil. So don't get all scared that the whole of Brazil is unsafe. Definitely certain areas that you need to be very careful, but you can have a very safe and calm and tranquil life if you kind of live in these smaller towns in the countryside. And I'll do more videos about these towns in the near future. Okay, so if you like this video, leave a like, subscribe to my channel. If you've got any questions, leave it in the commentary below. So thanks for watching, until next time.